Welcome back. It's Dr. Jen Ferboni, better known as DocJenFit, your doctor of physical therapy. And I want to go over anterior pelvic tilt. This is such a popular one. And most of the time it's you have tight hip flexors. You need to stretch them out. You need to dig them out. Not necessarily. And that is nothing that I'm going to show you today. Reality is anterior pelvic tilt isn't a diagnosis. It's not a reason for pain. And oftentimes many people have anterior pelvic tilt and have no pain. There was in fact a study that was done that showed that when they measured, I can't remember how many people, I'll link the study down, but they had 85% of the males that they measured had anterior pelvic tilt and 75% of the females they measured had anterior pelvic tilt and no one had symptoms. I think out of all of it, it was like 9% of the males actually had what the, people who were measuring would measure as a neutral pelvic tilt, and only 18% of the females had a neutral pelvic tilt. But again, what does neutral mean? And it's going to be different based on different clinicians that you go see. So technically, don't be afraid of your anterior pelvic tilt. However, what I want to say with the pelvis is that we want to gain better control, because when we have better control forward and backward, gaining strength and flexibility of both our hip flexors and our glutes, we have better control of how this pelvis moves, especially when we're adding load to our body. We're going on a run, a walk, we're jumping, hiking, whatever it may be, moving through our everyday lives. That's where we want to understand better control and stability of that pelvis, rather than worrying if it's in a certain position based on our structure, based on our genetics. There's so many factors that play into this. So stop digging out those hip flexors. That's not going to do you any good. And let's do some exercises that actually will help. Now, this first one here is to understand that better control of that pelvis. So I like to do this in a cat-cow, but traditionally what people do with a cat-cow is they just focus on the upper back. So we're going to lock that into place. Without moving the upper back, can you just tilt from the pelvis under as much lumbar flexion as possible, and then just taking that pelvis forward. So I'm trying not to move in my upper back at all. I want to move only through my lower back, and that's only because my pelvis is tilting forward and backward. And you might need to start really slow with this movement. So just really small, just tucking that tailbone, untucking that tailbone, tucking it and untucking it, and see what it feels like. Okay, how much range of motion can I really get? And starting to increase that range of motion, and then squeezing that pelvis forward, really actually putting some tension into that low back, and then tucking that tailbone under as much as you can, turning on that core. So really experimenting with how much range of motion that you feel like you can get just from that low back, and starting to increase and improve that range of motion over time is going to be key. The next really important thing that I think a lot of people glaze over or they don't want to listen to is the way that we breathe really impacts just the different pressures that we're putting within our body, and how our pelvis is naturally going to start to react to what our rib cage and our diaphragm is doing. So they have a relationship with each other very closely. So if I'm always having my rib cage kind of up and forward, I'm breathing into my chest, I'm not really paying attention. Well, this up and forward rib cage is more likely to cause a more forward anterior tilted pelvis. This is in relationship with this. Whatever my body does one way, it's going to react the opposite in the other way. So we want to pay attention to how we're kind of stacking naturally within our body, because I can say, oh, my hip flexors are tight all the time and I can stretch them and do whatever. But if I never change what's happening above, I'm never going to change what's happening below. So I want you to think of a lateral breath pattern. So you're going to take your hands on the sides of your rib cage, and I want you to squeeze that rib cage and try to breathe into your hands. So even if I was here, if I breathe into my hands, it naturally opens and I stack on top of that pelvis. So try that again. Unlock your knees. Relax in your body, and see how that naturally starts to stack in that pelvis without trying to squeeze the glutes or change the position or turn on your abs. If I just breathe from the sides of my rib cage, expand a little bit more from there, relax my belly, relax my knees, I start to change the position of my pelvis. That's huge. That's important. And then if I take that into every thing that I do for exercise, if I start to focus on that when I'm doing squats, okay, how am I breathing? Can I breathe from the sides of my rib cage and then squat, or deadlifts and then deadlift? I'm going to change what I'm feeling naturally within my body, which could result in a change in how you naturally hold your pelvis. But again, this is so dependent on your own individual structure, but just starting to get that lateral rib cage breathing is going to be huge. Not only that, but if we start to breathe more from the lower part of our body, our belly, our diaphragm, we relax what's happening up here. I reduce the tension in my body, which is going to reduce the tension in your hip flexors overall without having to touch or stretch them. Now I want to say, okay, this is where we want to get strong in our glutes and our hip flexors, that opposite sides that are working together. So I'm going to use a small resistance band. Now, this is part of our optimal body therapy kit. If you do not have resistance band, resistance loops, you're going to want to get yourself some. So get that optimal body therapy kit. Plus there's a free back plan that comes with it as well. Okay. So I'm going to put this around. Now, what you'll notice if I bring one leg up, I'm going to strengthen my hip, but I also squeeze in my opposite glute. That helps to stabilize. So I'm staying on one side of my body, right? So this is a great way to use that lateral breath, stack in those hips and that rib cage, and then get those hip flexors strong with my glutes. So it's going to look like this. Use your opposite arms. They're just like you're running. And then slowly bring it down. Slowly bring it down. And you get that good stack, that good alignment. You're getting that strength from that hip flexor, that strength from that glute, and it's keeping you down on that single leg stability. Okay. This is a great one to add in, especially if you're going to do like before a run, before a long hike. This is a great one to start to wake up around those hips. Now, just one more to actually find that good mobility with strength in that hip flexor. Okay, so I'm on a bench here. If you don't have access to this, sometimes I've done it off the edge of the couch. So you just want a place where you can hook the band to, and then I'm going to place my foot into the band, lay on the edge of your couch or your bench, bring your leg up so that you get like a more neutral, natural position of that pelvis. So you don't want it extended. So bring that knee up so that rib cage kind of meets where that hip is. So again, I can use my lateral breath, stack that rib cage down, and wherever that is, control with your core. So keep that in place. I'm going to kick into the band here, and then I'm going to slowly let it come out. So nice and slow. I'm going to think of now squeezing my glute as it comes down. And I think of trying to extend into that hip flexor as much as possible. What I'm doing is I'm putting pressure into my hip flexor as I lower it. This is called controlled mobility, working on that eccentric lengthening of my muscle as I'm getting strength into it. So it's a good way to build that long-term mobility rather than stretching is great. I love stretching. It feels good. It helps to relax the body. But after you've done that, then get some load into that muscle as you stretch it. This is so key to, again, keeping that long-term mobility. What you'll notice here is that my pelvis doesn't move and I squeeze in my glute as I'm coming toward the ground. So if you just did 5 of those on each side, you're going to start to feel like, whoo, such a difference in that whole front of your body leading up to that pelvis. And this is what's really going to help to ultimately build better control and stability around your pelvis. Don't forget, if you love what you're learning, I have so much more in stock for you. So hit that subscribe button, check out the other videos I've done in the past, and leave any comments of any suggestions that you have for videos in the future. And I can't wait to help you feel incredible and amazing within your body.